Hello, my name is Christian Henson, and aside from my work with Spitfire Audio, I also moonlight as a film, TV and games composer. I've done a bunch of orchestral scores, but there's just one catch. I can't really read music, I don't know much theory, and I didn't study this at college. So here's the second part of my tutorial on how to program realistic sounding strings. Last time we looked at chamber strings, which we established is not in fact a form of music for sex pests, but merely refers to an orchestral band that is smaller than a symphony orchestra. Where strings are concerned, I'd say anything between a couple of players to around 25 string players would qualify as chamber. We discussed that any string band is essentially 5 voices and that violins can play high or low, but must always play above the violas, cellos and basses. We suggest these rules not because they can't be broken, it's just that when you're trying to create realistic mock-ups of real instruments, the first and easiest rule is to empathise with what they can do. This will restrict your options in a way that channels you towards reality. The other thing I'd recommend if you want to program realistic string parts is listen to good string music. Immersion in great music will help us, the non-trained individuals, how to instinctualise good writing and arranging as opposed to studying it. That is, before you hype the bejesus out of it. So in this tutorial, we're going to look at symphonic strings. In many ways, these are easier to program than chambers, so I'm going to hold our concentration by complicating matters in this episode with some technical tips, which we'll get into in a minute. A symphonic string band typically is 16, 14, 12, 10, 8, a total of 60 players. But for me, I would say anything above 8 first violins down and you're kind of getting there. For me, there's 3 different types of string arrangement. I call them the 3 C's. Choral, which is when you play strings like a choir, a big mass of chords moving together pretty much all at the same time. Conversational, it's when 2 different sections or voices talk to each other, whether it be in polite question or answer or a ruder argument where both voices are pushing in different directions and sometimes at different times. This is often referred to as counterpoint. Imagine 2 people speaking over each other at the same time using different pitches so they can get their voice heard. And then there's accompaniment. This is when a string band is a bed or bubbling rhythmic underscore for another voice or set of instruments. Different string sizes tend to focus on these different classes of orchestration, so a quartet rarely underscores and accompanies, as it is the only band in the room. It is very often conversational and occasionally choral. A chamber band is probably your most versatile and will perform all functions, but doesn't sound anywhere as awesome as a symphony band when it comes to choral. A symphony band can be cumbersome in conversation, but awesome as an accompanist. All these are vast generalisations, but may help you when picking which size sample library you're going to work with. Returning back to my chamber strings tutorial, it is always good to remember that you have 5 voices to play with. This is especially true of symphonic samples. Go beyond 5 voices and the whole thing can really start to sound like an awful string patch on a synth. You can split these sections up in a symphony orchestra so each section plays more than one note. This is often referred to as divisi or divided. But what I would do with programming is add Wellian weight to each voice so you get that enormous sound, but try and keep it to 5 voices so you don't create a thick, condensed, flowery gravy. The other thing to remember with symphonics is that each section doesn't rely on the next to produce harmonic support and sonic richness. The numbers are so big with a symphony band that each section has a silky richness to itself. This means you can really spread the strings across the range, from deep down in the basses to the gods with the violins. So as a vast generalisation, these kind of finger shapes work excellently for big bands, not so good for small. And I wouldn't do this with symphonics unless you're going for a synthy type sound. I threatened some technical stuff, but I think it wise to crack on for a bit. So here goes, a new piece sequenced as explained in my last film using a keyboard controller, Logic as my DAW,
some fader controllers with dynamics on the first, expression on the second, and vibrato on the third.
And remember, keep these moving no matter what, otherwise it will sound like you're conducting an orchestra of cadavers. I'm using Spitfire symphonic strings, which was formerly known as Mural, and like on my chamber tutorial, the majority of what I use are ensembles patches, which are baked presets using all instruments in a patch that you can play with both hands, with single sections to add detail, focus and definition. We can select articulations, which are kind of like vowels and playing styles, with these switches on the interface, or indeed via key switches on your keyboard controller. But I personally like the old-fashioned way of having one articulation per track. As I mentioned before, programming is like an oil canvas. So the first step in creating a new arrangement or composition is a very rough charcoal sketch, which I'll usually do at the end of a working day when I'm all kind of lubed up and the imposter syndrome's been parked for a while. This means that I never have to come to work to a blank screen. Okay, let's go.
Just a basic ensembles tremolando, symphonic strings. I'm not a patient man, so I'm just going to drag this out. Lasso, force legato, duplicate into a harmonic track, and then freeze so that when I drop in, it latches. Next up, what I always write with the flautandos. Okay, just going to check. There's some weird quantization there. I just want to take off quickly. Yeah, it's just whacked itself onto the wrong 16th there. Now we need to speed the tempo up to 1-3-2, just to make it a little bit faster for this next bit, which is going to be a staccato section. So let's take that up to 1-3-2, and I'm going to make it nice and smooth, so the tempo is going to change every eighth, and I continue with the new tempo. There we go, apply, lots of lovely tempo events to the right, and onto a brushed spiccato kind of sound. Actually, let's start with the col legnos first. Oh, and this is when these, when I freeze them, it becomes a pain. So, okay, let's just get rid of those. So we've got that sustain that ends there. Delete that down and then refreeze again. So it plays wherever you drop it in. Okay, let's have a go on those col legnos. Equivalent of a drone, but a rhythmic one. Okay, we'll loop that and move on to the spiccatos. Not easy on a weighted keyboard, that. More of the flautandos. Just another drone. I'm going to stretch out and force legato before I play the other parts of the chord sequence on another flautando patch. The main section. I'm going to build that up with lots of different harmonies later. Okay, so this actually is wrongly titled. That's Super Sultasso, which we'll use later, but I need another flautando patch just to end the piece with. So Super Sultasso, brilliant sound there. We'll come back to that. We need to bring the col legnos to an end there, nice natural end there, and the last bit.
Okay, with the charcoal sketch done now, let's take a brief technical interlude. Other than what controller do you use, the most asked question we get here is which reverb we use, or what is the best reverb? Well, I'll get into that in a minute, but first, let's talk about these Spitfire string samples. We record these just as you would any string band in Air Studios, so you're ostensibly working with a carefully created board mix where each set of mics is given a stem which stands for a stereo master. So you can mix them between them like this. So here's, for example, the close mics, which are a whole bunch of spot mics a few feet away from each desk of the band. A desk, by the way, represents two players who share the same music on the same music stand. I think these spot mics have a very modern sound, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine they started to be introduced when mixing desks got bigger. They're great for intense and tight action sequences, for focus and crispness. The next is what I tend to use pretty much all the time, is the tree mic, which are three of the most expensive mics in the room, in decker formation, placed above the conductor's head. It's kind of what he or she hears, although you hear a bit more of the room and the players at the back because they tend to be about 8 feet off the ground. Finally, we have the ambient mics, which sit way up high, around 12 to 14 feet up, and really capture the room reverberance. These are great for surround feeds, but I'm not going to go there today. Some sample libraries really need reverb to bring them to life because they're being recorded dry or close or not in situ. Spitfire libraries don't theoretically need reverb because they have plenty of room options. But the truth of the matter is most engineers handed a desk mix, like the one offered up by Spitfire's libraries, would still add a bit of splosh to flatten and merge the whole thing together, to make it sound super widescreen and cinematic. There is also one very important consideration when using these samples, and that is, if they're well produced, there'll be performances, and if they're performances, it means there will be some inherent issues that you'll need to fix with reverb. Namely, longs versus shorts. Listen here to some of just the tree mics for our short articulations. And now our long. You'll notice the release triggers, which are the samples that are triggered when you let go of the note, on the longs, don't sound as reverberant as the shorts. Let's listen again. Now, this isn't because the shorts are louder or create more reverberation. It's not because Spitfire Audio have programmed it wrong. It's simply because when you ask a string player to stop playing, she or he doesn't stop dead. They gently bevel the end of the note off by doing something called a diminuendo. This is just a natural performance style for them. Imagine sitting in the back of a black cab and you ask the driver to stop. Imagine then if he were to hit the brakes with everything he'd got. You'd not appreciate that experience. So the same is with orchestral players. They let you off gently. The net result is release triggers are always considerably quieter for longs. But this is the natural sound. The way to fix this is by stemming your strings into different signal paths, which can then be affected differently with different reverb levels. There's 3 reasons this is a really good idea. 1, by putting your strings through FX busing, it means you're using the same reverb across the band. This will make sure it'll sound like they're all playing in the same space at the same time. Tweak this one reverb and you tweak it for the whole band. 2, by stemming your different string articulation styles into different buses, you can tweak the amount of reverb they have. 3, it's great if you're using samples in combination with real players. It'll mean that you've track-laid your samples, or I refer to them as fakes, in a way that means you can really tweak them around the performances and strengths of the live players, providing support where they need it. Even if you're planning to use 99.9% real recordings, you'll find there's always a point where your samples may come to the rescue, so it's always great to have them stemmed in this way. So this I'll come back to later, but first of all, back to the splosh. Okay, so what is the best reverb? I can't answer that other than what's the most expensive, but there are 2 very important considerations. 1, what do the pros use on big blockbuster recordings? I'm not saying what they use is the best, but if what they use is universally all over blockbusters and you want your stuff to sound like the stuff you hear on the radio, see on the telly or watch in movie theatres, why not use what they use? 2, what suits working with samples? Now, this is a bit of a tricky, sore subject here, but for me, this triangulates my choice of reverb into 2 or 3 choices. Point 1 is a fairly straightforward one. Pros use TC6000s above everything else. It's a massively expensive piece of outboard kit that costs about at least $10,000 US. But TC Electronic have also put out some different iterations of the TC6000's VSS3 algorithm as part of the discontinued power core range, for example. These are well worth looking into and seeing if you can grab from eBay. And I've also heard rumours that you may hear the words VSS3 and native soon. If you do and you can afford, buy. The second is the hot topic of impulse response versus algorithmic. By the nature of working with samples, you're often using the same moment in time over and over and over again. And when you're writing, you're playing back, correcting, and mixing the same moment in time over and over and over again ad nauseum. So if you combine this with yet another sample technology, impulse responses or convolution-based reverbs, you'll be triggering one moment in time by another over and over and over again. Now, I'm not saying the Convo or IR reverbs aren't good. They're all over final mixes of my music. They sound great. But when I'm writing, I just don't feel happy using them, because every time I hit that sample, I'm hitting that moment in time, which is also hitting that other moment in time. And every time I hit these notes and they're hitting the reverb, the same exact thing is happening. There's no chaos in there for me. So for me, it's algorithmic all the way, which the TC6000 is, but also the Lexicon reverbs, particularly the Lexicon Native Bundle, are fantastic solutions. So if you're rich and you want to be stationary, the TC6000 is awesome. 2, if you're stationary and inventive with your shopping skills, some kind of power core solution. 3, if you're on the move and on a budget, the Lexicon Native Bundle, hands down, absolutely awesome. And if you're really trying to kind of save your pennies, do check out Valhalla DSP, who, in my opinion, have the best budget verbs hand down. I'm using the native Lexicon random hall here, and I've matched the decay time to my favourite patch on the TC6000, the warm hall, and the default decay for that is 2.6 seconds. So I've matched that with the Lexicon. So here's the best string stemming configuration I've evolved into using over the years. For now, I'll just dwell on why it works from a unified wetness point of view. So I stem into 4 string groups: longs and legatos, shorts, pizzicatos and col legno, and then finally trems, harmonics, and effects. The reverb return is 100% wet. We don't want any live signal going through that bus, as it would just phase with the live signals that you're hearing on the other tracks. Then I'll add a bunch of splosh to 1, less to 2, very little or just a tickle to 3, and the most to 4. Once you're happy with how these are set, you can then adjust the total reverb level to how wet you want to mix the sound, which will be useful later, because it's likely that as you work on your cues, you'll probably just add more and more reverb, and a dialing back phase in your mixing may reap some rather wonderful rewards further down the line.
Okay, let's finesse this cue. Some performance legato, some sonic grout. Let's add a little bit more interest into the drone. Super saltasto. I'm just going to work on the harmonics a bit so they change a bit. think we need a bit of low stuff now. Oh yeah. So that's a low flautander. Let's have a go with the kind of just a normal longs. A little trick here, transpose down 12 samples so you get natural octave cellos and basses as written. Oh yeah. Okay. So I'm copying that to a brighter, harsher short. I'm just going to automate that up so it grows as the section develops. Great. Down to some pizzas. I think that last note's a bit cheesy. Take that off. Okay, very nice. So let's work on the dynamics of the flautandos we recorded previously. That's about all we need of that drone there, the E. We've got to be careful not to lose that sonically because it is an important part of the harmonic sequence. So I've got to figure out a way of making sure that cuts through as we add lots of lines to it. So it's, let me think. So maybe we should just look at the modulation, which is the dynamic layer controller for this part. Just lift it up towards the end. And put it in the Super Sultasto, which has lots of artifacts. It's lovely. Okay, just going to copy that up. Oh, it's lovely. That sound. I really like it. Okay, let's look at the chaps at the bottom. Cheated octave. bad with them. So just want the upper bit there. Some legato there. Building up the harmonies, so I'm just gonna get rid of that little schnall bits first. There, we'll change that. Oopsie. Okay, and another go at the end. Let's quickly go. Great. So that I've recorded with this Divisi Consort Normale and the legato. Gives a lovely, quite Hollywoody sound. So it's okay, that's the kind of idea. And let's just get rid of that. And Divisi Consort Normale and legato. Let's have a go at the firsts. see if we can take it up one more gear for the end. Kind of thing, yeah. That's the kind of thing. Let's put it in the legato. A little bit more motion at the top for the end. Using tremolando. Okay, now we're completely losing the rhythmic part of this, so I'll have a look at that in a sec. Good. Bad Bartok, bitey Bartok. Great sound when you get 60 players to do that. Okay. Okay, so just the middle bit here just needs a bit of melodic interest, so I'll add that in with some legato-y sounds here. Okay, so I'm happy with this. If you're preparing for a session with a live player or group, you'll find that you have an excellent set of stems to track, lay and work with. For me, live strings are all about the lyrical articulation. So if you're going to blend live and fake, you'll really want control over the longs and live. You know, you want to mix the actual melodic notes of the live really out there and possibly push the samples back. Conversely, you may be disappointed with, say, the tightness of real players in a stressful recording situation. So you may want to blend the live short staccato patches so they're just a little shimmering crust above the surface of your samples. But most importantly, if you're working with restricted numbers, really consider how you use your forces for textural elements. So where I've added these harmonics 2 octaves up or held a little shimmering tremolandi, do you want to divide your sections to play those things where samples are perfectly believable?
And finally, pizzicato. These can be a world of pain for the player and mess with your expectations entirely. They'll be looser than you imagined on the day if you're using live. So don't be afraid to do a backup take where you ask the band to tacit all pizzicato. Believe me, if you're using good samples, those will just work fine. And don't be proud about it. You know, you can just literally dial the pizzicato samples in and off you go. But obviously we've stemmed them, so it's not an extra kind of massive hassle for you at the mix stage. And finally, if you're planning to use 100% the real band, these stems may give you the backup and security you need in case something was missed. You don't need to dial in the whole sample band, but an awry bass pits or a slightly fruity harmonic can always be fixed at a later date. So thanks so much for listening. Next time, solo strings, vibrato and quantization. See you then.
Thanks for listening. And as a very quick postscript, I just want to point out that this has very much been done as a YouTube presentation. So I've worked very quickly, probably about the speed that if I was really up against it with a deadline. But a piece like that, I'd usually like to spend at least a day working on and finessing. Some of you have pointed out there's a discrepancy between these live tutorials and, say, some of the work, say, for example, that Andy Blaney presents. That is because if we were to present a live tutorial of composing a piece like that, the fantastic and very talented Andy Blaney, you'd be looking at sitting and watching YouTube for a couple of days at least. Obviously, we can't do that. So I hope this gives you the principles of programming, which is really not that much programming at all. It's really an intuitive, performance-based craft. Thanks again.